The initial idea for setting up the archives started in 2008 when we were making a cut through Alrewas for the 2008 Alrewas Arts Festival. And for that film we were interviewing people about the canal and their memories and so on, and it was just fascinating to listen to people talking about their relatives. And at the time I remember thinking we ought to preserve this somewhere, but the idea didn't really go any further than that. But it was probably in 2010 when we made the second film, which was based on the village during World War II, called Alrewas a Good Billet. And again we were doing more in 2010 when we made Alrewas a Good Billet, which was looking at the village during the war. Again, we were doing oral history interviews, and it seemed to me that we really need to do something about this time. So once the film was made, I got together with Delma Harrison, who was experienced in putting bits together, and we went to visit HLF in Birmingham, who gave us some advice, and then we came back and put a bid together to set up Alrewas Archives. And I'm very pleased to say that we got the grant, which meant that in 2011 we could start setting up Alrewas Archives. We realised that we couldn't really collect lots of things like photographs and documents and store them anywhere because we didn't have anywhere to put them. So the decision was made pretty well from the start that it would have to be a digital archive, so that they could be stored in a relatively small area and, more importantly, accessible to as many people as possible. The first project was called Alrewas at Work, Rest and Play, and in that we decided to cover places, education, employment and recreation as 4 areas that we felt would cover as broad a range as possible. We looked at the period between the 1930s and the end of the 50s, mainly because we wanted to capture the memories and stories of older members of the community so that their stories could be kept for posterity. And also pre-1930s there weren't that many photographs, and I really wanted it to be photograph led because people do love looking at photographs and it can stimulate such a huge amount of discussion. What we did was we held a number of what we called reminiscence events. What we did was we held a number of reminiscence events at the village hall where we basically invited people to come along and just chat. We got some old photographs that we put on display boards, and they were great for stimulating conversation. So people were sitting around just having a chat, somebody said something, it sparked off a memory for somebody else. We didn't do any filming them, but we just made a note of people who we thought would be worth interviewing. And again we carried out a series of oral history interviews, and the outcome was a third film and a book which was made available to anybody in the village free of charge. 2011, 12. In 2013 we decided to put another bid together for the second phase of the Alrewas Archives project, which was called Alrewas A Time of Change, because between the 60s and the end of the 90s there had been a huge amount of change in terms of building within the village, the number of groups and so on, and the whole community we felt had grown massively, and we wanted to capture that. Also, it was a natural point in time to go. So again we made a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund as it was then, and we were successful in that bid. And again we made a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund, and again we were successful. So we followed a similar pattern. We used the same headings as we did before. We interviewed people, we got people together, we asked for photographs and video at that time because that was a point where people were making films at home. And again we added to the archive, which was starting to build into quite a nice collection of photographs and memories and stories. We produced a film again, and we produced a bigger book this time. What I wanted was something like a coffee table book that was full of pictures for people just to sit down and have a look at and remember things, and also be a nice item to have. We gave a copy to every single house in the village, which was about 1400 at the time. So it was a big task, because the one thing we want Alrewas Archives to be is accessible to as many people as possible. During the time that we started Alrewas Archives, it's occurred to me that it was very important that we didn't just look at the past, but we recorded what was happening now. There was a lot happening in the village in terms of events and changes, and so it was important to capture that. So I set up something called the Museum of the 21st Century, and just encourage people to take photographs. We had cameras they could borrow if they wanted to, but by then a lot of people were using their phones and had bought cameras. So we started to gather a huge amount of material for the period that we were living in at the time, and I personally tried to capture as many things as I possibly could. And eventually in 2020, no it wasn't, and eventually in 2021 I felt that we needed to do something with this material. We hadn't had an arts festival for 4 years, and so in 2021 I felt that we could do something with the material. Almost a quarter of the way through the century, there hadn't been an arts festival for 3 years, and the next one was going to be in 2022. So I made another bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund, and we were successful, with a view to looking at the development and changes in the village from the year 2000 to 2022. Not quite the same sort of thing. We weren't allowed initially to hold reminiscence events in the village hall because of COVID. So because I set up quite a good network of people, and people were used to being asked for materials for the archives, we could do that through Facebook, and just people who I knew would take photographs for me. And so again, there's a huge amount of material that we've gathered. And obviously, the year we published the book, which is 2022, there were some things that weren't in it, like the Jubilee and the 2020. Obviously, when we published the book, there were some things that weren't in it that were happening that would have been nice to put in it, like the Platinum Jubilee and so on. So my idea with this particular book is it would have fairly short run, and then every 2 or 3 years or so, probably to coincide with the arts festivals, we would have an updated version of that book, just so that we could keep it up to date. The response to the archive has been amazing, really. It was very slow to start, because understandably people were thinking, well, who is this person and why does he want us to let us see all of our photographs? But eventually, well, quite soon to be quite honest, people got the idea and started to let me borrow photographs and documents to scan. Didn't keep anything, it all went straight back. And now, how many years are we? 10, 11 years on, people almost on a monthly basis say to me, oh, do you fancy seeing some of these photographs I've got? Or I've got this that I found, do you want a copy of it? And I always say yes, because inevitably it'll be something that's useful. And it's taken a long time for people to realise that what they would see as ordinary photographs of their family and family doing things are actually great historical documents, because if they've taken place in the village, it shows the village as it is at a certain point in time. So the response by the community has been fantastic, and I think they appreciate that the archive has been set up. It's vital that Alrewas Archives is accessible to people. It is a digital archive, which automatically means that the way that you can look at it is online, which for the majority of people is fine. However, very aware that that doesn't apply to everybody. So this is why we've produced printed materials. We produced books for the 3 official phases of the archive, but in between time other books have been published as well. In 2019 I published a book called Alrewas in Pictures, which was just a collection of pictures that I had handed to me and scanned, over the years and felt that people should see because they're lovely to look at. So produced that, and that went down really well. In 2022, I created an updated version of that, which had an additional 60 photographs in there. Again, some I hadn't used before because of space, and others that had come my way from people giving them to me. So that's gone down well as well. People like Anne Whitehouse have written books as well. She's written one about the history of the mill. It's something she's had in her possession since the 80s, and we were lucky enough to get a grant from the Lichfield Council to get that printed, and that's gone down absolutely amazingly. Another vital source of historical documents, a nod must be given to the late Roger Halewood, who was an amazing local historian and collected a huge amount of materials for his own works and to contribute to the archives. Not that long before he died, he let me have a copy of a book called Alrewas Men of World War I, which is a tremendous amount of work. Just before Roger died, he let me have a copy of a book called Alrewas Men of World War I, which is a phenomenal piece of work, describing the lives of 250 or so people in the village who were involved in the war, and it's a fantastic piece of research. He also some years ago created a book called Alrewas and Miscellany, which is all those lovely little bits of information you want to know about a village, why a road is called a certain thing, names of pubs, all that, you know, huge amount of work in that. So now that Alrewas Archives is studying that through its website to ensure that continues to be available. We hope at some point to be able to publish a further version of the Norman Stubbs book, which was printed in the 1980s and updated by Roger in the mid-2000s. So there's a lot of material there that people can access to read. There's stuff online, and there are films that they can watch. So hopefully there's something for everyone, really.